anyway, let's get started today. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us. I haven't seen you in a while, and I really do miss getting to see you one-on-ones and having coffees and things like that. So this is going to be the next best thing that we can do. COVID has thrown us all for a loop, whether it's personally or whether it's within your organizations that you work for. As you know, as most of you know, I'm Barb Schrader, the Program Director of the Community Foundation, and I'm working today also with Julie Reagan, who's our Communications and Marketing person with the Foundation, to help put this Zoom call on. I will tell you, this is the first time for both Julie and me as doing this as a team to try to do this, so we're learning, and so please be patient with us. Before we get started, just a couple things. Make sure everybody is muted so that when the speakers do things, you know, they're able to do that. In addition, before we get totally started, we're going to do a very, very quick poll to know the experience range of the group of us that are together today. It will show up on the screen. And there's just two questions, very simple, that we'd like for you all to answer. The first one is, have you written a grant proposal before? And a quick yes or no. So we just kind of get that. And the second one is, if you have received a grant from any type of funder, what is the largest grant check you have received? And just to kind of get a feel for if you are an organization who's getting funds, large or small dollar amounts. So we'll wait just a few minutes for this to go. We'll just take a few seconds. Just a few more. And you can see it, they can all see this, can't they? Yeah, okay. Okay, just a few seconds, and
so now they can see it.
Okay, you can see our results here. So it looks like most of you have written a grant before, and I'm looking at two screens here, so I'm going to have to step up just a minute to see here. And it looks like a majority of you, 33% of you, have received grants over 25,000. But then the next is those for under 1,000. So kind of a mix of grant applications that you guys have done. Okay. Just also tell you, we recently emailed Boone County nonprofits and asked you to complete a survey with questions addressing the impact COVID has had on your organization. I want to thank you for those of you who did complete it, and I will tell you the #1 concerns that were voiced by many of you was that you had to cancel your fundraising events, and there was a loss of revenue, and you had concerns about your future operational funding. And so that is what came back from our survey results recently. We hope today to be addressing some of the needs you shared by providing information on grant writing opportunities and tips to help you with, hopefully, to raise those funds that will be less, or you anticipate less, for this year. We also want to highlight that we'll be hosting 2 more sessions this year. I'd love to say that we're going to see you in person, but who knows, it may all be just like we're seeing each other today via Zoom. So stay tuned. In addition, if you are not receiving emails from the Community Foundation, please email us after this call so we can add you to our email list so you can stay informed with grant cycles, events, and happenings in our community. Finally, a few housekeeping details before we get started. Throughout the presentation, please type your questions into the chat box, and we will answer unanswered questions at the end. Please make sure you're muted during during the speaker time. And if you are an attendee, if you as an attendee would like to offer a tip from your own experiences to others on this meeting, you will have that opportunity at the end of the session today. We will email you to, at the end, your reference guides and materials after the call today. So now let's get started with our 3 panelists that we have today. They are Gigi Nichols. She is the founder of The Gifted Word. Eric Hessel, who is the program director of the Hendricks County Community Foundation, new vice president of programming just recently. And Ann Hudson, who's the founder of Good Seeds. They are wonderful experts in the field of grant writing and have been very involved in it in various capacities. So we will start today with Gigi, and she will give you her insights on grant writing. Thank you. Gigi.
Thank you, Barb. I appreciate that, and it's delightful to see you again in person, and I recognize lots of you from my work throughout Boone County, and it's a pleasure to see all of you, even if it's just a tiny little thumbnail picture of you on the screen. Glad to see you all again, and hope that everyone and their families are doing well during this challenging time. Barb asked me to start with what I think are the basics of a high quality proposal. Just to give you a quick background, you may have read my bio here on the screen, but I have been doing grant writing as a freelancer for the last 3.5 years. And I wrote grants prior to that for a nonprofit I was part of. And then prior to that, I wrote a number of grants just in my previous incarnation as, I guess I would say, a professional volunteer while I was a stay-at-home mom raising my kids. So I'll start with what I would consider the basics of a high-quality proposal. And I knew my dog would start barking right now. I just knew that. So I'll try to keep him from barking over me. The first is that any good proposal needs to have a close alignment between your request and the funder's priorities. You just have to make sure that what you are asking for is the kind of thing that your funder wants to donate to. They are representing their donors' wishes, and so they can only give money to organizations that are carrying out the work that their donors want to do. The second thing I'd say is you have to have a clear presentation of a community need, not just your need, but what need in the community are you trying to address? If you say, well, we want to get a van for our organization, that's your need. You need to show what the need in the community is that van will help you address. Which leads into the third point, which is you need a clear explanation of what your organization does that addresses the need you've described. Beyond that, you have to show evidence that your intervention, whatever it is that you do as an organization, is likely to be effective. You have to either show evidence from your own data that you've collected throughout your experience as an organization, or you have to show research that shows that interventions like yours are likely to be effective. You also have to be able to have statistics that back up the need that you've described, that show just how many people need this or how big the need in the community is. And you also have to have statistics that back up the research that you're putting forward to support your claims. Also, and this can't be stressed enough, you have to be able to show that there's some kind of measurable outputs, what it is you actually create and do, and outcomes, what happens as a result of that for your interventions. all funders are looking for ways to measure the effectiveness of what you do, and they're going to be looking for outputs and outcomes to do that, and you have to be able to show how you're going to measure that. In addition, funders are really looking for evidence of ways that you are leveraging the money that you're asking for in a grant. So any evidence that you have of partnerships, either ones that you currently have or ones that you are looking to develop, will really strengthen your proposal. Finally, I would say, or well, actually, there's two more things. You have to have enough emotional language in your proposal to make the need real and human. You need the need to have a human face for the grant evaluators. You need to have enough emotional language in your application for that, but not so much that it sounds needy. So there needs to be a balance between the logical arguments and the emotional language. And finally, I think the last item that you need in a high quality proposal is either an angle of approach, a particular way of approaching the problem or approaching what the funder is asking for, or even maybe just a turn of phrase that you use somewhere in the proposal that is memorable. You need something that makes your proposal stand out a little bit. It's something, oh yeah, that was the one that talked about blank. You want yours to sound a little bit different from just a standard routine cut and dried proposal. So that was the first thing that Barb asked me to talk about, which was basics of a high quality proposal. Now I know all of you have written proposals. It sounded like almost all of you had, and a number of you have had successful proposals, so you've probably used a lot of those techniques already. As I said, I'm a freelance grant writer, and so Barb also asked me to talk about what are the questions that I ask clients who I work with. What are some of the, and this would be valuable for you, even if you're not using an outside grant writer, it's useful to think about these kinds of questions because they're things you need to answer for yourself as well. And the first is, what is the specific purpose that you want to use these grant funds for? Those purposes need to align with what the funder is providing funds for and what their granting guidelines are. If you're saying, well, I just need money to pay my staff, then you need to be sure that the granting agency will allow you to use it for operational expenses, because most of the time they don't. So you need to know, what is the specific thing you want to use this grant money for? Because that is the key, that is the nut around which you're building up your whole request. What partners are you going to have, or do you have in this project? And then question of sustainability. If this is an ongoing project, how are you going to sustain it over time? What data do you collect and how do you use it? What research do you have to support the effectiveness that you claim you have? And the most fun part, what I really think gets to the heart of what makes a good proposal is then after we've gone through those dry, more difficult questions is, tell me about your organization's history. Tell me about its culture, its mission. What's your origin story? Think of yourself as a superhero. What's your backstory, your origin story? Because that is sometimes where the best, most compelling arguments come from that a funder or a grant evaluator will be moved by. So those are the questions that I like to talk about with my clients. And then Barb, the final thing you asked me to talk about are what resources do I use? I would say I almost never write a grant that doesn't include census data in some way. So using US Census data is very valuable. There is also an online database called savvy.org, S-A-V-I, savvy.org, which is it's supported by the Polis Center at IUPUI, and it is a really good resource for all kinds of data on primarily Marion County, but it does cover other parts of the state as well on many topics, and you can get a lot of great statistics to support grant applications with that. I organize my research data because I do write for several different organizations. And so sometimes what I need is a way to keep track of the various research articles that support the arguments and effectiveness of a lot of different organizations. And so I keep track of those with a program called Zotero. It's primarily used by like college professors and people who are doing research papers, but it's a great way to keep track of research. And it also will automatically create your bibliographies and citations in your grant applications. For project management, these last three kind of have to do with the collaboration within your organization. I use a project management tool called Trello, which keeps track for me of the various projects that I have in ongoing. And for me, they're all things that I have to do, but you can use it within your organization to keep tasks for everybody. With one of my clients, we use Google Docs a lot which I don't particularly like, but it is an effective tool. I primarily write in Word, but then we'll upload it to Google Docs so that everyone involved in looking over the proposal can weigh in on it and make suggestions and comments. And Google Docs does a great job of keeping track of the whole history of that. And then finally, I would recommend, especially if you cannot work collaboratively or if you don't have an editor, definitely use something like Grammarly, which will go over your work and will look at not just your spelling, but your grammar. And boy, it finds mistakes of mine all the time. So it's really quite valuable to use. So trying to stay within my time slot. I hope I didn't run over too much, but those were the things you wanted me to talk about, Barb.
That sounds great. Any specific questions right now, or we can go to the end? It looks like there's none in the chat. Is that correct? Looking here. Okay, so we are now going to move on to, thank you very much, Gigi. Now we're going to move on to Eric Hessel, and let's have his insight into what he's doing in Hendricks County. It also just shows you a little bit different. I realize, we're in Boone County, but I will tell you, in the community foundation world, we work and network with a lot of the program directors throughout the county, in particular the Central Indiana, because we have a lot of the same types of issues and all that we all address. So Eric, if you could please start. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name, like Barb said, is Eric Hessel. I was newly promoted to Vice President of Programs like yesterday, so I didn't message Barb to change anything. We're good. I have actually been at the Hendricks County Community Foundation as a paid staff person for 10 years. It'll be 10 years in October. And so I have seen all kinds of grant-making programs that we've done. And I often sit on these grant writing panels to kind of give you the back end side. So I'll tell you our dirty little secrets and the little tricks and tips and tell you some of the honest things. I think community foundations like to trade staff members sometimes to do this. So we're not always the ones saying it to our grantees, but somebody else is saying it. I have to double down on Gigi's recommendation of Trello. You will see through my presentation skills that I'm a chatter and I can veer off in multiple directions, and Trello helps me in my project management world to keep things on track. So I love Trello. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, a little bit about foundations in general to give you a gauge. I know there were a lot of questions prior to the session about where do I find grants? What's the best, where do I go? And there are some great resources, Foundation Center, There's Grant Station. They're paid memberships. Sometimes your local library has a membership to one or those. And you can always ask your local foundation. So I have a lot of folks that will call me and I'll say, you don't really fit in this program that we're running right now, but I know that Duke Energy Foundation is really heavily focused on education right now. And it may be a really good fit for you there. So like Barb said, we're all pretty well connected with foundations. And so we also know each other and know what people are looking for. So we can kind of guide you if we can. We, as a community foundation, I think the name often sounds like we're all the same, and we are all often different. We do a lot of similar work. But when I have some regional organizations, and I know there are some on this call that serve more than one county, sometimes they'll go, oh, Boone County gave me a grant, so I'm eligible here. And we'll go, no, we have a little bit of different formula and model. But so I always tell people to keep that in mind. Your community foundation is a great resource for potential funding options and can give you good advice. But we're not all going to work for everybody. So just a fair warning on that. That goes kind of to Gigi's point about alignment. Always make sure that you align with the foundation's mission or the mission of the program you're applying to. First off, it is a waste of your time to apply for a grant that you're not eligible for. I know you all are running incredible programs that are making a big difference in your community, but that's not always compelling enough at the foundation level. So make sure you align. You don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste the foundation's time to review an application that just does not fit. And we're not dumb. So I have definitely read a million applications that are like, oh, no, this is education programming. And you're like, you're the animal shelter and that's not what you're doing here. Like, so sometimes it's easy to get caught up in your mission and how that could align if you phrase it this way or that way. Just be really careful. I always recommend, especially for community foundations, to reach out to their program officers. I think we're pretty accessible. Not every foundation is going to be that way, but I'd love to have a conversation with you as the funder in our community to go, I know that our application says we fund arts programs, but in reality, it is 1% of our funding. And it usually also needs to involve kids and puppies, like painting together, and then it's a fundable art project, right? And I can give you kind of that insight or help you maybe frame it in a way that is more accessible to our committee, because that's kind of how our process works in general, right? Like your program officer is going to accept all those applications, read through them for eligibility, and then distribute them to a committee, which is scary for a program officer sometimes because it's kind of left in the hands of some folks that have opinions. I was talking to someone the other day, and we are often comparing not just apples to oranges, but apples to oranges to like a Wagyu steak cooked perfectly and an ice cold glass of water, right? They're all valuable. You want them all, but we only have $20, right? And so there's opinions that go into these in these committee meetings where they're weighing the value of an apple, which is healthy, it's fresh, and the value of that steak, which is expensive but full of protein and also equally valuable but a different value. And so we work with those committees to help make strong decisions, because at the end of the day, no matter what you think, there are more asks than the dollars that we have available. I wish we were as rich as we like to think we are sometimes, but we're not. And so we got to make good decisions as best we can. So um, we accept those applications. I review them. They go to a committee. The committee does a round of review, asks questions to me. I add my questions, and then I go track down nonprofits and try to get as much information as I possibly can. We're never going to have all the information. I often tell my committee, I know you want that information, but do you need that information to make a decision? Because people are curious, right? They're like, oh, I want to see 5 years ago financial statements for blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this is a $100 grant for hot dogs for the children's fair. Like, why? You know? And so I spend a lot of time being your advocate in that room, and also the advocate for the committee to you, and balance that with them. Some folks will use a rubric. We have a very basic rubric because my committee really didn't want to use a rubric. So you'll hear all kinds of horror stories about that back end work. I'm always willing to share that rubric with folks. So when people ask, like, my goal is to make your job easier, not harder. My job is to distribute funds to high quality agencies quickly and efficiently, with you doing the least amount of work, because your job is not grant writing. It is whatever your mission is, right? I usually take a moment during my grant making presentation to say, you cannot rely on grants to fund your organization. I often encourage folks to say, this is a grant to help us skill up, to move to that next level. Community foundations and foundations in general are fickle. We choose to fund one thing today, and next year we'll fund a totally different thing. And sometimes our reasoning doesn't make full sense to you. And then it feels personal, like we don't like sad puppies in cages anymore. We do, but we've moved to a different direction. Like, we're really designed to help you boost what you're doing to the next level, sometimes to save something, right? Like, we'll talk a little bit about COVID here in just a minute. But like, there's been a big gap. We lost a big federal grant, or one of our biggest annual donors passed away and we don't have that. That's a great time to call your community foundation to talk about how that might help you, how they might be able to help you. But we're not designed to be your regular funder. Doesn't mean we always do that, but we're not designed to be that. And as folks tend to budget their community foundation grant and then it changes, there's hurt feelings there, and that's really not what it was designed to do. So really think about how that grant can skill you up, move you to the next level. Gigi had mentioned data. Another data point that would be great, your community foundation just did a awesome needs assessment, and you know, it might be nice to look at their data and slap that into your grant application. It shows that you paid attention to the work that they did for that. We did one as well, and so we're like giving that information out. We want to know that you used it. It's good data, and so it's another great way to show some alignment. Some folks like to look at a foundation's 990, and I just want to caution you on doing that. We only have to report grants over $5,000 on that. And as a community foundation, a lot of our grants do fall underneath that level. And so some folks, I've in fact had someone print our 990, throw it on my desk and say, look at all these grants. They're all the Indianapolis organizations. How dare you? And I'm like, well, there's only 7 grants on there right now. Don't you think we do more grants than that? It's because many of them would fall under that 5,000. So keep that in mind, because I know that's often a tip for talking to a funder. And then let's talk COVID. Little known secret, we are figuring it out along the way, just like you are. I like to walk into a room and act like I know everything. That's my personality. But we are trying to figure it out. We are trying to learn. We don't know what's going on with every agency. It is a pandemic. Unless anyone in here is over 100 years old, they have not lived through one either. And we are trying to help. I've encouraged all of our nonprofits to reach out and tell me what they need. I don't know everything, and we're trying to create programs that help you guys solve these problems. Our initial reaction was immediate rapid response grants to health and human service organizations that are on the front lines of serving people with COVID, or who have to stay open. Our food pantries, like, they have to stay open. We need to make sure there's funding and food available to those folks. That was our initial round. As we've grown, last week, I was saying this at the beginning, we launched a matching program that will run through the end of the year, because the impact has been broader than just those health and human service agencies, and we're trying to meet the need where it is. I have had so many questions about that, and I go, good question. And I write it down and I try to answer it my best and then add it to the website, because there are things that we haven't thought about, but we're trying to meet the need where it is. So give your foundations grace, give your colleagues and your community grace, because we are all trying to figure it out together to best serve our community. So that is, Barb knew this was going to happen, 2 minutes over my time. But I know there'll be questions, and, I'll talk forever.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yes, I realize you're 2 minutes over. No, you're fine. And we'd like to hear now from you and hear some additional information. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk for a few minutes about once you've sort of had some success with grants from corporations, foundations, that kind of thing. What about state grants, federal grants? For some of you, that's not really going to apply, because you're probably still so small that it just doesn't make logical sense to do that. But for some of you, it will make sense. And hopefully, if I remember, I can talk for a few minutes about how you could make it work if you're a small entity. So I guess a little background first. I've been doing grant writing, grant review, supporting foundations for probably 30 years in my business. But before that, to give you a little encouragement, when I was about 27 years old, I wrote my first grant proposal. Definitely self-taught, for a neighborhood development, a neighborhood organizing group in downtown Indy, super low income, had never received any kind of money before. And we won 2 national grants. So everything I'm telling you, which is, if you're small, you're probably not going to get a national grant. We did. So there are exceptions, but I have sort of decades of experience from both sides. And like Gigi and Eric, and I think Barb, the folks at the foundation, I'll have additional tips that I'll send your way after the session today too. So we're going to talk briefly about state and federal grants, that kind of thing. I want to clarify, if you're not aware, there's the term grant, there's the term community block grant, development block grants, CBDG money, and there are contracts. And for your purposes, from your side, you're going to think of it all the same. It's basically a pot of money that you get from the state or federal government. And they're different kinds of pots, but some are grants and some are contracts. But they're still money, and you can still use them for your operations. Those grants and contracts come in lots of different ways. They cross every industry. So everybody on this call, I'm pretty sure, could potentially qualify for one of those. There's definitely money from some federal or state agency within your field. A lot of times, especially more and more in recent years or decades, they cross over. So for example, if you're in housing, it might be a housing and addictions grant. It might be criminal justice and art. It might be tobacco and healthy pregnancies, gardening and youth, or youth diversion reporting centers. So it would be helpful to you as you're looking for potential grants to look not just in your field, but potentially in other fields, because there might be some connections through another industry that makes sense for the work that you do. So that's one thing, look across fields. So just what Gigi said, they're also going to be looking for evidence that you're well connected with your peers. So unless you're already well connected with peers, you might not be ready yet to do a state or a federal grant. The last thing I want to say about just in general is that both state and federal have release dates, and then they have deadlines. A lot of foundations do too, but these are very specific. So on September 1st, they will release a request for proposal. And it will say, you know, you have 8 weeks to put this whole thing together, and then you have to give your proposal by this date. So it's definitely something that you have to constantly stay on top of, because you can easily miss a release date and then you've lost your opportunity to apply. Most of them, I would say all of them, but I'm not really an expert. Most of them are going to have proposal writing sessions. They're always free. Some of them are going to require you to attend. And I'll tell you why. It's because both of them, state and federal, are extremely complicated processes. And they, just like foundations, do not want to see junk come across their desk. So they want to make sure that you know exactly what they expect of you. The proposals themselves, unlike, especially for community foundations, but a lot of foundations still have a fairly loosey-goosey proposal process in terms of, you know, as long as you answer these questions, however you want to give it to us, it's great. It's more of a narrative. For state and federal grants and contracts, it's very formulaic. There's often forms involved. So just the act of writing a proposal can take significantly more time than it might take if you were writing a proposal to a foundation. The other thing you have to do in that proposal, well, to Gigi's point, you need to, whatever questions they are asking in a request, that's true whether it's for a foundation or for a state federal grant. But you get points assigned, literally points assigned for a state or federal grant. So, and it can be the littlest detail, the font that you use. Did you mention this word? If you didn't mention this word, you don't get a point. It can be very, very kind of annoying. You have to follow every single thing exactly as they want it and in the order they want it, or you will lose points or you will not gain points. They'll also give you additional points if they say this contract or grant is for a rural area, but we're especially interested in extremely low income areas. If you can show that your work is in a specific census tract that is super focused, like really, really low income, you could get 10 extra points, which could get you that grant. So the point of all this is to say that they have a minimum bar, and if you don't even get enough points for that, they're not even going to consider your proposal. Those proposals are usually reviewed by teams, usually people not from the agency. They try, but we all have heard stories where there's no bias, extreme objectivity. So it's much more rigid than a foundation, which might go, you didn't talk about that so great, but we kind of love what you're doing, and so we'll give it to you. The state and federal government do not operate that way. Those, unlike again foundations, which are tend to be a little more flexible, they want very objectives and outcomes, so very quantifiable. They want evidence about everything. So all that to say that if you don't think you're ready to be that rigid and that focused on what you're doing, then it's not time for you to try to apply for state or federal grant. Reporting. Barb asked me to talk about reporting. Foundations all do different kinds of reporting and have different kinds of reporting requests. Federal and state, again, depends on the agencies, but that reporting, again, is super rigorous in terms of there are forms and tables and all sorts of things you have to complete. They take a lot of time, and you don't just complete them at the end of the grant, you complete them, it can be monthly or quarterly, it's continual. So while we definitely want you to have someone managing every grant you receive from a foundation, with a state or federal grant, you definitely need somebody who every week or every month is really paying attention to what you said you were going to do, and that you're pulling that information together and that data together so that you can report it back. So it does require, it's not like a once and done, oh, we got a $50,000 grant from the federal government. There is a ton of work required for you to keep that grant because they will not pay you if you don't do a good job reporting. So let me talk about payments real quick. The other reason a lot of entities don't go after a federal or state grant or contract is because not always, but most often they are reimbursements. So in their performance, so a lot of times you need to at least have a little bit of cushion in your budget, in your fundraising, to be able to pay for something and then get the money back. So one example is a summer feeding program, which a lot of communities have, and definitely any school or any agency in Boone County could definitely apply for money for summer food programs, which is a meal program, right? But you have to purchase the food, and then you have to show the state your receipts and how many people you fed, and then they will give you the money for that program. That's most often how that works. So again, you would not do a state or federal grant if you don't really think you have the cushion to sort of prepay things. They make payments pretty quickly, but there's still going to be a lead time. I think that's it with that. I think the other thing that Barb asked me to talk about is just how do you find these state and federal opportunities. One is, and Eric, mentioned this, but if you go to your peer websites or their newsletters, even outside the county, if you just do a little Google search of different organizations like yours, you're going to notice if they receive money from the state or Fed. And then like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Great information, right, to find out. Subscribing to newsletters in your industry, like if you're a youth program, subscribing to Indiana After School Network newsletter, they always, every time a federal or state opportunity comes, they'll put that in their newsletter. And I'll send these out. The big one is grants.gov, which is the federal website for grants for any agency. They have an app. You can sign up for each agency's e-newsletter, kind of blasts about stuff coming up. And the state has the same thing. The Department of Administration will list opportunities, but you can also email the director of each agency at the state, and they will send you anything that's coming your way. And then back to my original comment about, check time here. Oh, I'm done. Back to my original comment about if you're small, the one thing that can be really helpful for a small entity, especially if you're focused on like one thing, is to subcontract. So you could go to another organization in Boone County, and because you know about something, but you know you're way too small to do the big thing, you can say, you know, we would love to provide just mental health services for your kids or transportation for your seniors. They'll submit the grant and the contract, and they'll subcontract with you. And so you're getting the money, but you don't have nearly the burden. So that's one way to sort of dive into that pool. Okay, I was supposed to cover, which I'm not going to, but I can send out tips, ways, other grant sources for immediate needs. So Barb, I can put those in the chat box, or what do you want to do? You want to just send it out later?
Well, what? I was going to say, we're going to send it out later so that everybody can on schedule here with their time, since we will be sending everything out to everyone at the end. So to continue, thank you all for sharing your knowledge. Now, is there any additional questions that anybody has that we would like to address? It looks like we have one. And again, any of the three presenters can also chime in on these. When a grantor asks for a financial audit, is it appropriate to send a financial review? Is there any thoughts on that? And if so, please respond, any of you.
You want to answer, Eric?
Sure, I'll start. And how about, and if you want to fill it out, they're not the same thing. So my first answer is no, but my second answer would be call them, right? Like, especially if it's Barb, right? If it's your community foundation, a local funder, you know, maybe, I mean, even some of the bigger funders will respond to you and ask them if it's okay, because they may just have written financial, okay, remember when I told you we're not perfect and we don't know everything? Sometimes we write the word financial audit because that's the word that's in our head, and it might not be exactly what we're looking for. So if it has the right information, financial review might be okay to submit. So I would just ask the funder. Having those conversations is so valuable.
I agree with that. The other thing to that point is that foundations, like even the Lilly Endowment and others, audits are expected at certain levels when you're a certain size organization, but every foundation realizes that when you're a small mom and pop, you're just volunteers, you got 3 staff, you got a budget of 100,000, they do not expect an audit. And a review is often doesn't happen either. So, so to Eric's point, yeah, ask ahead, because it's also possible they'll say, forget it. Like, we have this list of things we expect, but in your case, we can make an exception.
And I would echo that as well, from a grant writing perspective and from my experience on the other side of it. Funders are usually very willing to work with you and answer questions if you feel like your organization doesn't quite fit with what is being requested. You know, most of the time, foundations will list a contact person if you have questions. Don't hesitate to contact them. The one caveat with that is where Ann was just talking about the governmental grants, those you can't. They have a specified way of asking questions. They have a window of time during which you are allowed to provide questions via email, and they will answer all of them at once in a document that they send out later. And that is so that the competition is deemed to be completely level and objective, and they cannot answer any individual questions for you one-on-one. So that's true of governmental grants, but of foundation type grants, they're almost always willing to work with you to explain something that you don't understand, or to give you one-on-one feedback about a particular situation for your organization. They're in the business to give out money. They are representing their donors, and it's their job to give the money out, so they want to give it out to organizations that they know that their donors would feel good about.
And the other thing I'd like to just address on this is all community foundations are tied to Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, which is a statewide organization, and they can answer a lot of questions for us. So if we don't know the answer, many times I will contact Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, who's way more knowledgeable in certain areas than we locally may be, and their experience is there. And so I'm going to tell you that's what I would do also with some unknown scenarios. We have an additional question. It says, probably more for Gigi and Ann on this. On the average, what is your success rate on grant applications written versus the ones that are funded? Either of you?
Since I'm still unmuted, I'll go ahead and jump in first. I think that's a tricky question to answer, because it is going to vary a lot based on your organization and your, I don't know, I suppose your grant writing experience. I would say that my success rate has gone up quite a bit as I have continued to write grants. I would say at this point, my success rate is probably about 80%, but that's pretty high. But that's also partly because I help my clients choose grants that they're likely to get, because I don't want them to have to spend money to, their organization's resources to pay to have a grant written that they're not likely to get. So I don't know that there are any industry-wide numbers for that. I think it's very different for, say, like academic grants. I think the numbers are much lower for those. It just depends a lot on how competitive they are. Anne, what are your thoughts?
I would agree. And, you know, if we had another half an hour, we could talk more about all of that, because Gigi makes a point that's important in terms of your success. If and when you hire an external person, which you don't have to do, you want to hire somebody like a Gigi who is going to help you make sure that it's the right fit. And number one, and number two, which I'm sure Gigi does, make sure that your program is good enough to put forward to a funder. Because success, my experience in all these decades is, and working with foundations, is that the success rate generally is pretty low overall. If you're going to spend 40 hours writing grant proposals, you have a lower success rate than if you spend 40 hours going after individual donations. So it is not necessarily a good use of your time. You can get a big reward at the end if you win. So generally, that's not where you want to put all your eggs. You definitely don't want to put them all in that basket. But your success is going to depend a lot, based on what Gigi said, on the quality of your program and the fit.
Okay, we have another question here. Let me see here. I'm in a unique place, a foundation that supports our library. They don't have programming. We fund the library's programs and resources, of course. So when reporting on budgets, financial audits, etc., do I use the library stats or the foundation stats? Anybody here?
Anne, you
Yeah,
start.
well, I think it's the same as the audit. So you ask the entity. Usually if you're a foundation, they want to know your own health as a foundation, but they'll also want budget information about the program if it's a sustaining budget. But Eric can answer that better.
Yeah, you know, libraries are really interesting in their own right, because they're, you know, quasi-governmental funded, you know, and they can take certain funds and not take certain funds and put some funds in certain places, which is why they have a library foundation. And so, you know, I would talk to the funder and just get clarity. It might depend on what exactly you're applying for too.
Okay, I'm going to end here with, does anybody here on the call anybody like to provide a tip that they would like to share with their experiences as they have written grants themselves? Any tips that you would like to share with others here today? Here's your opportunity. There's lots of you here. Okay, I'm giving you a few more seconds. Okay, well then, I'm going to reiterate, obviously this is an uncertain time for us all. Not only are you looking for funding, but we as funders are trying to determine how we can make the most impact with our available unrestricted funds. So much is unknown, as you all know. Just want to remind you that we are still having at this point in time, a fall grant competitive cycle with letters of inquiry due August 13th. We are also looking at other opportunities down the road to try to distribute funds where they are needed within our community. Other than that, I would just like to share with you, I did contact Indiana Philanthropy Alliance for any recommendations they might also have on grant writers, and they did come back to me in the last couple days with an organization called Quill Consulting. Now, I am not as familiar with them, but I wanted to let you know that information. I did ask them if they had a base fee to write a single grant, and they do not. They said they do a lot of work on a retainer basis, but they do some special projects and do work with small nonprofits too. We will send you the link and information to about Quill Consulting as a potential opportunity for you in the grant writing world. And finally, if you haven't heard, there is a grant opportunity statewide that was put out by Lilly Endowment last week. And it is called the Youth Program Resilience Fund. It is due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And these grants will serve organizations that serve youth ages 5 to 18, with those applications due 8/10. We will provide you that information again after this call and link if you are interested in that. Unless there's anything else, do you have any additional comment, Gigi, Ann, or Eric, that you might want to end this with before we close for the day?
I just wanted to let people know that if anyone on the call ever just wants to call and discuss a grant opportunity, no charge, I'm happy to talk with you either via Zoom or phone or email. My contact information will be in the materials that you get. I'm more than happy just to discuss things with you and bounce ideas around and help you think about ways that you might approach a grant that you're writing in-house. And I just really enjoy helping out fellow Boone County folks. And so feel free to reach out to me if you just want some quick advice.
I'm glad you said that, Gigi, because I was going to offer the same thing. Just in terms of emailing, if anybody has any questions or just some advice or counsel, I'm always happy to do that too. Not a problem.
I'm not going to help you write the grant, but I would be happy to answer questions. Maybe you don't want to talk to Barb yet. I'm happy to bounce ideas off of. I know there were some questions that came in before. We didn't get to all of them. And, I'll send Barb some of my responses to those just to make sure they're answered. But anytime you let me know, I'm happy to help.
Okay. Well, again, everybody, thank you very much. You will hear from us with this information about this session in the next day. So have a great day. It's sunny outside and enjoy the sunshine. Take care.